Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Practice Notes. And this week I want to talk about hustling and hustle culture and how to unpick that and unpick all of the sort of patterning that so many of the messages we received these days make us feel about our creative practice. Maybe you feel that your creative practice should somehow be different from how it is. And really, I'm here to say that no. Your creative practice, exactly how it is today, is exactly how it's supposed to be. And somewhere maybe buried between the sort of anxieties you might have about how you actually should be creating things, that there will be identifiable patterns in your behavior. Understanding those is the key to kind of unlocking more enjoyment of your creative practice. And that is different for everyone. Last week's episode, I was talking about life stories and I told my life story. And I think one of the points that I wanted to get across there is that when you kind of tell your life story, that can be very helpful in having these little light bulb moments that are like, oh yeah, that's the way I work. And so rather than looking at all these other people over here and understanding how they work, all I need to do is look at how I have worked in the past and be more that. Just be more that. So I wanted to just go into some of the kind of messages and the content that we consume that make us feel like we should be getting followers on Instagram or building a YouTube channel or releasing X amount of EPs or albums or whatever, or even releasing things in a particular format. There are a few different forces at play there that I think operate in slightly different ways. A lot of us grew up in a world where the music industry was functional and people could make an album, find a label for the album, release the album, make enough money to sort of survive for a couple of years, maybe do a bit of touring, come back, and do that over and over again. And that worked. And you could kind of stick to an artistic vision and you wouldn't get pulled around into, just constantly creating content, etc. And that led to, I think, a very strong sense of culture. I think, if you're a similar age to me, you're mid-40s or even, a lot of people would have grown up with this idea of, artists who were kind of defining the culture of our time. And so, we feel very nostalgic about those artists. I think often people come to creating music through that sense of like reverence and nostalgia for the artists that you love. I don't think there's anything kind of like nefarious or sort of constraining about that. But I think it can lead you off the path of your own creativity. Not that you shouldn't be trying to emulate, like, I don't know, if you love Aphex Twin, there's absolutely nothing wrong with like trying to make tracks that sound like Aphex tracks or whatever you want to do. But getting too caught up in that sense of kind of like sort of cultural solidity that you feel about those artists you love, that is very circumstantial. That's the result of a process that sort of you went through in that period that resulted in you feeling that way about that artist. But it's not necessarily real, so you don't necessarily have to be constrained, or at least notice that is your response. That's very much the sort of narrative that you've built up around your favourite artists. And you can step away from it. Maybe you can take some inspirations from different people and then go and break those rules. So another way that I think we can get trapped into a sort of certain confined way of thinking about how we should be creative is just the way the infrastructure of the industry, the platforms that are out there, basically. Nowadays you've got Spotify and Bandcamp and, maybe, SoundCloud. Not really sure what's going on with SoundCloud these days, but you have these platforms where music is released and consumed. I listen to the vast majority of my music on Spotify. I occasionally listen to things on Bandcamp. But the thing to be aware of there is how the medium is the message, the sort of the shape and feel and interaction of these platforms, and how they kind of nudge you into very specific patterns of consuming things if you're a consumer, or releasing things if you're a creator, which is another thing that needs to be unpicked. But the whole way those platforms work have a really, really strong effect on what we think music should be, it's just another thing to be really aware of. Be aware of how these platforms are just influencing what you think should be done. And the power of noticing that and examining that is that you can then say no to that. There are all sorts of ways that you can build up these ideas of what music should be. One really good example now is how long a piece of music should be. That's something that has evolved a lot over the sort of 25 years that I've been involved in the music industry. I mean, when I first got into the music industry, kind of 2000, I was releasing tracks on 12-inch vinyl. And those tracks were being played by DJs who would be manually beat matching the records. And there were some just very defined rules about. I was releasing drum and bass, and basically you had to have a 64 bar intro. That intro had to have a really clear pulse. That pulse had to start at the 1, so that the DJ who was playing it could kind of cue it up and really easily beat match it to the record they were mixing out of. And then the record had to be long enough for them to do the other thing in reverse with the next record. So that meant that, most tracks from that era were like 6 minutes, 7 minutes long. That was a kind of brief that I was working to. And then, of course, nowadays, no one really beat matches anymore. Some people do. There are some purists who still beat match, and I think it's really cool that people do that. It's like a nostalgic thing, and you don't need to do that. A lot of people don't do that. Now we have the USB stick culture. Your tracks are instantly synced, so it means that tracks can be a lot shorter these days. And of course, when TikTok came along, the hook culture of basically you need to get the hook of the song in the first 3 to 5 seconds. So nowadays, the length of tracks is shrinking and shrinking. The details don't really matter. The point of it is that culture is really, really influenced by these kind of technological innovations and how they're adopted. They're such strong forces to shaping our creativity, and like all of this stuff that patterns us, if you know how it's patterning your ideas about creativity, then you can say no to it. And in saying no to it, you can potentially unlock new ways to be creative that suit the way you are, your ideas, the way your energy works, much better than trying to kind of shoehorn yourself into the pervasive narrative of the time. So another thing that's worth unpicking is how creative tools are marketed these days. I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this. I see so much marketing material from plugin companies and DAW companies and equipment manufacturers that are basically saying, this is the piece of kit that will help you break through to making that hit record. And a lot of tools are sold with this marketing message, and it really bugs me because, in a way, it kind of feels like advertising for gambling, because the music industry has always been competitive, and it's even more competitive than it ever has been. To actually get to the point where you have some kind of hit, or even build any kind of audience or get any numbers, let's say, for your creativity, is a huge amount of work and a huge amount of luck. I confess I have a bee in my bonnet about this, partly because this is really the industry that I work in. You know, I make tools which I sell to people. That's nowadays how I make my money. I don't want to sell my tools to people selling shovels and sieves or whatever to people trying to pan for gold. Be aware that the way tools are sold to you will subtly be shaping the way that, you know, what you think you should be achieving with those tools, and I think can lead to negative patternings where, you know, you just end up buying lots of stuff because somehow that tool that told you it was going to break you through to a new level of creativity somehow didn't. So you go and buy the next tool which promises to break you through to a new level of creativity, and it didn't, and so on and so forth. Really, the only person that can help you break through to a new level of your creativity is you. I think maybe this kind of like emerging theme for this channel is, if you want to break through to a new level of creativity, just look at what you've done. Look at what works, do more of what works, and do whatever you can to unpick all of everything else that is telling you to somehow do things a different way. Those were just a few things to look out for that might be subtly undermining you really getting in touch with your own creativity. So to conclude, I really just want to emphasize again, do whatever you can to really understand, like, where does your joy come from? Where does your flow state come from? You know, look back at the things you've done and just, oh yeah, I really enjoyed doing that. Spend some time asking yourself why you might be somehow discounting that. It's just like, oh well, it's, you know, it's not what I should be enjoying. No, it is what you enjoy. Spend some time reflecting on why you enjoy it. Build your narrative around what creativity is for you based on how you reflect on what you've enjoyed in the past. And the final thing is, which I honestly think should be a caveat to every piece of advice that is given by anyone. In reality, this is always hard. It's fuzzy. It's unclear. It's sort of 90% of the time you're scratching your head, and then 10% of the time, you know, you'll have some kind of breakthrough, you'll have a moment of clarity. And so, although I say, you know, reflect on what you've done, look for the joy in that, understand how the narratives around you are telling you that that's wrong, and challenge that. That's a very simple formula. Like everything, it's really hard to apply. I don't think it's something that you should, you know, do a handbrake turn on your creativity right now and suddenly reframe everything with that framework. And it's more, you know, just bear that in mind as a little thought. Spend 1% of your energy on thinking about that a bit every time maybe it comes to mind. Maybe you'll forget about it. Maybe it's useless. That's also fine. Be gentle. Nudge yourself. Don't push yourself. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Practice Notes. If you want to support me, I've got a Patreon. Link to that is in the description. I also make tools for making music, and they are not going to help you break through to your platinum hit, but they are fun tools to use. I had a ton of fun making them. I know that there's a ton of people out there who had a ton of fun using them. Maybe they will be interesting for you as well. Link to my shop is in the description. It's at timexile.com. And yeah, see you in the next one. Bye for now.